I hope you've had a very good day so far. I would have liked to have this happen in person where I could meet you in person, but given the circumstances, we're going to have to make do with online. Nevertheless, it's an honor to be invited to speak at this event. I'm a journalist. I worked in television for 15 years, and in the last year, I have quit television, and I'm now an independent journalist on the internet and an entrepreneur. But I want to talk to you about the first story I did that actioned change. I want to tell you the story of that story. I was covering a story of a young woman who lived in Pune and worked for an IT company. She was in her early 20s. And one day she worked late in the office and took a cab home, or at least she thought she was going home. What happened instead is the cab driver and 3 of his friends took her to a secluded area, raped her and murdered her. I happened to be having a conversation with her husband, who was fighting really hard to make sure that those who killed his wife got justice. And he told me that the driver had in fact misused the child lock feature in the car to lock his wife into the car and not let her escape. And he said something really powerful. He said, if the child lock feature did not exist in that cab, my wife would be with me today. And that got me thinking about the number of women and young girls who take cabs on a regular basis without realizing the danger that comes with the child lock. The child lock is obviously a Western feature. Overseas, children are normally in the back of the car by themselves, and so you don't want them opening the car door on their own, which is why you put in the child lock, and it locks and it can only be opened from the outside. But in India, specifically to do with taxis, it will never happen that a child is sitting by themselves in the back of a car of a taxi, not a private car, but a taxi. And so we realized that we had this feature that came inbuilt in all of these cars that were making it dangerous for women. And we wanted to do something about it. But at that point, I wasn't a very well-known journalist. We didn't have a large following. We were a very small channel. What could we have possibly done? The more we examined the issue, the more we realized that this was something we wanted to change. Because there was, on a regular basis, every few weeks, a story of another woman who had been harassed or teased or sexually abused by a driver who had used the child lock feature. So we decided we're going to do something about it anyway. Never mind if we're not powerful. Never mind if we're really small. There were 3 things that needed to be done. First, to inform as many people as possible about the child lock so that they know that such a thing exists. 2, to actually let people know when they're getting in the car how to actually check for the child lock. And 3, to speak to government to make sure that the rules change so that drivers of taxis can no longer use the child lock feature. So we started small because small is all we had. We used someone's car and a phone, which everybody has, and recorded a video demonstrating how the child lock works and telling women that this is something they need to be aware of. That video went really viral. A lot of people saw it across the country. They pushed it to each other. They said, you must watch it, you must be informed. And more people knew that the child lock existed. And through that video, they also knew how to check to make sure the car is not child locked before they got in. So points 1 and 2 were ticked. Now point number 3 was the really tough one. We met with state governments and central governments. And I don't come from an influential family. So when I came to the city, I knew no one. I don't know anybody in government. So actually getting appointments with ministers and with officers was really difficult. It took us a really long time. But we kept at it, and we tried and tried and tried, and we spoke to state governments in Maharashtra, in Karnataka, in Delhi, and with the central government, with the Minister of Transport, Mr. Venkaiah Naidu, who is now the Vice President of India. And we explained to each one the dangers that the child lock actually brings. And over the course of many months, because we picked this up in September 2018, in July 2019, the central government and several state governments decided that taxis can no longer use the child lock feature, and that new taxis that were being registered would have to dismantle the child lock before they become taxis. This was a huge, huge win, because we knew that we would have saved many, many lives. We would have saved many young girls and women from harassment and from being groped or being sexually assaulted by taxi drivers, because that child lock feature no longer existed. Even though at that point when we started, it was small, non-influential, and didn't have any connections, just making sure that you stay on course brought about change. So today I want to give you very quickly my recipe for change. Now, all of us in our lives have things that we see around us that bother us, that we're not happy with, that we would like to ideally change. But how do you bring about that change? Because there's also this sense of, what can I do? I'm just one person. No one's going to listen to me. Everybody's going to laugh at me. Let's just drop it. But I'm here to tell you that that's not true. Where each of you can make a change if you set your mind to it. And here is my 3-step recipe for making a change. Step number 1 is conviction. You have to be fully convinced that what you want to do is good, that what you want to do is reasonable, that what you want to do will improve lives. You have to have proper reasoning for why you want this change. And more than anybody else, you have to be convinced of that reasoning. Step number 2 is to hold strong. Change doesn't happen overnight. There is no overnight success. It is invariably a very, very long road. And when you hold on long, you do a couple of things. 1, you convince the people around you that you really are serious about this. And 2, when you dig in your heels, you change the universe. So if we go back to the cab example, we were convinced and we had proper reasonings for why we believed that the cab locks had to come out. And so every time we spoke to someone, we were backed with data, we were backed with information, we were backed with solid reasoning. And so tomorrow, for example, if you decide that you no longer want your parents to buy milk out of plastic packets, and you have proper reasoning, you have proper data, and you are convinced about it, and you hold on steady to that conviction, they will eventually see your point of view. So remember, first, you stay convinced. Second, you hold steady for the long term. And finally, you start small. Don't be afraid of how small you are. A lot of times, like I said, we feel like we can't really make a difference. Start in your circle of influence. From where you are right now as young people, your circle of influence is your home, your school, and through the internet, the whole world. You could put out a video if you wanted to and reach people across the world. Never before in history has influence been democratized in the manner that has been done by the internet today. There are no gatekeepers. You don't have to ask anybody's permission. If you believe in something strongly enough, you can put out your message for the whole world. I mean, imagine tomorrow if you first convinced your parents not to use plastic milk packets, simply as an example. Then you convinced your school not to use harmful packaging that's harmful for the environment. And then you managed to convince the world of the success that you had already achieved. You need to believe in something that matters to you. And when you believe in something strongly enough, it doesn't matter how small you are. It doesn't matter how alone you are. It doesn't matter if first people frown and say, what is wrong with her? Why won't she let this go? She's such a weirdo. Over a period of time, people will see your point of view. People will hear your reasons, and people will come around. And it's only when you hang on for a really long time and you convince people, not just through reasoning, but also through actions, that you will action change. So as young people today, in perhaps the most powerful time in human history, I simply say this to you. The recipe of change has only 3 ingredients, but the cooking time takes a while. But if you really believe that you want to change something, start today. Thank you.